That would have been reflected in the crime scene, and you didn't see that. It was a very controlled, purposeful crime scene.
This was kind of an unusual situation. I could still hear the woman screaming on the inside of the truck.
Of how many people he has access to and remote locations that he could abuse people and dispose of them.
At 14 years old, Regina believed that she was in love with her 18-year-old boyfriend, Ricky Jones. So they decided to run away to Mexico and start a new life together. As they were hitching a ride out of Houston, a friendly truck driver pulled up and offered to help them. That would be the last time they would ever be seen alive again. And they would not be the only ones. This is the case of Regina Walters, the 14-year-old who was violated and abducted while being photographed. Born on May 5, 1975, Regina K. Walters was one of the 3 children of Carolyn and Jerry Walters. When she was 6 years old, she lost her older sister, Diana, who sadly took her own life at the age of 12. The parents then divorced, and the dad went to live in Houston, while the mom stayed in Pasadena, Texas. Regina and her brother Brian mostly stayed with their dad, Jerry, but would visit their mom often. On February 4th, 1990, at around 9:30 p.m., Regina told her mom, Carolyn, that she was going out to see a friend and would be right back. Her mom tried to stop her, but being a teenager, Regina was defiant and they got into a huge fight until the mom relented. Sadly, that would prove to be a big mistake. When Carolyn came home from work the next evening, she was surprised to find that her daughter was not yet home. She called all of Regina's friends to see if anyone had seen her, but no one had. She then called Regina's father in Houston, but he said he had also not heard from her. The distraught mother then went around the neighborhood asking around for the missing teen, but no one knew anything. Although Regina had a history of running away from home, she would always return on her own or call her mom to let her know that she was okay. But this time round, Caroline never heard from Regina, and she knew that something was wrong. So she went to Pasadena, Texas police and filed a missing persons report. She described Regina as a white, 5-foot-tall female weighing about 95 pounds and having long, curly brown hair. Posters and flyers with Regina's face on them were circulated around the area, with a reward being offered to anyone with information that would bring the teen home. 5 days went by without any information, and then one day, Caroline received a call from someone who said they had seen Regina talking to 2 young men on the evening that she left home. The caller identified the 2 guys as 18-year-old Ricky Lee Jones and 17-year-old Billy Wayne Gibbs. The 2 were not strangers to the police, as they had already had a criminal record and were wanted in connection with an auto theft. So what business would a 14-year-old have with such kind of people? Later that evening, police managed to track down Billy, who told them that Ricky and Regina were in love and had run away to Mexico together. Since Ricky was on probation for theft, going out of state was a violation of his parole. So the police issued an arrest warrant for him and then placed Regina's information into the National Crime Information Center database to ensure that every law enforcement agency in the country knew that she was a missing person. While this was going on, Regina's father, Jerry, received a strange phone call from a man who claimed to have information about his daughter. The caller allegedly had asked if he was talking to Regina's father, and when Jerry said yes, the man told him that Regina was in a loft of a barn and that there had been some changes. He had cut her hair. Jerry then asked the caller if Regina was alive or dead, but the man hung up before answering. While Jerry was reporting this to the Houston police, Regina's mother, Carolyn, was also telling the Pasadena police about a weird phone call she had received from a stranger, saying that he had something to tell her about her daughter. The caller told her that they should meet the next day at a nearby convenience store so that he could relay the information in person. The next day, Carolyn went to the convenience store, accompanied by several officers who watched her from the car, hoping to catch the guy in action. They waited for over 2 hours, but the caller never showed up. When the police later traced the 2 calls, they learned that the call to Regina's father came from a gas station in Ennis, Texas, about 200 miles from where Regina was last seen, and the one to her mom was made from a payphone only 2 blocks away. The strange man called again 2 weeks later, asking for another meeting in the same convenience store with Regina's mother. The police immediately traced the call to a nearby payphone, but by the time they got there, the man was long gone. After this, there were no more leads for the police to follow, and the case went cold. In September 1990, a farmer in Illinois went to burn down his old barn, which had been abandoned for years. As he was inspecting the barn for the last time, he noticed something suspicious in the loft, and when he got closer, he was horrified to learn that it was a human skeleton. He immediately ran out and called the police. From the level of decomposition, investigators could tell that the remains had been there for quite a while. But there were no clothes or personal items to help identify who the victim was. Police could not even tell whether the victim was male or female, or what age they were when they died. However, judging from the size of the skull, they believed that the victim could have been a child, and they were not wrong. A pathologist later determined that the remains were of a young teenage girl who had been dead for almost a year.
Mark was able to determine that it was a young female between the ages of 14 to 16, approximate weight, which was 90 to 110 pounds. There was indication that her hair had been cut. The distal ends had begun to grow again, but the forensics had told us that it was recent.
The cause of death was ruled to be strangulation, with the killer almost severing the neck off by twisting the balling wire around the victim 16 times. But there was something else, something really strange and creepy. It seemed that the killer had also shaved the girl's private parts before killing her. Using dental records, the FBI soon identified the victim as Regina Walters. But who could have done such a horrible thing to her? And where was the boyfriend? Since Ricky Jones was the last person to be seen with Regina alive, he automatically became the prime suspect in her murder. But then, based on how Regina had been killed, an FBI profiler determined that Ricky was probably not the killer after all.
If Ricky Lee Jones had murdered Regina, he would have done it in a fit of anger, and that would have been reflected in the crime scene, and you didn't see that. It was a very controlled, purposeful crime scene.
The agent developed a profile of the killer, describing him as an older white male who traveled around the country, maybe as a salesman or a truck driver, and based on the crime scene, the agent could tell that the killer was a sadistic perv who derived pleasure in inflicting pain on his victims.
Whoever did this crime was doing things beyond what was necessary to perpetrate the crime. Maybe a sexual predator or sexual sadist, a person that had other offenses also.
Around that time, investigators received some information of some other human remains being found in a town 200 miles from Houston. The skeleton was that of a young man who had a small bullet hole in his skull. Although at the time investigators could not identify the body, the victim's age and location in which he was found led them to believe it was probably Ricky. The killer probably killed him quickly to get him out of the way so that he could be alone with Regina to do whatever sadistic things he wanted to do with her. For the months that followed, investigators followed every possible lead that would help them catch the killer, but they all went cold. And for a while, it seemed like the person that had killed Regina with her boyfriend would actually get away with it. Meanwhile, in Arizona, a highway patrol officer saw a truck parked at the side of the road with the hazard lights on. He went to see if the person needed any help, but as he got closer, he could hear a woman screaming inside. When he tried to get in and investigate, a man suddenly jumped out and introduced himself as the driver of the truck. The man was acting suspiciously and tried to talk his way out of the situation, even handing his gun over to the officer.
And I asked him, I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Nothing, officer, we're doing just fine." He said, "Just no problem. I've got a gun in my back pocket." And he motioned to his back pocket and then put his hands up on the side of his truck. This was kind of an unusual situation. And I could still hear the woman screaming on the inside of the truck.
After putting the man in handcuffs, the officer went to check inside the cab of the truck, and what he discovered was truly chilling. a terrified woman was handcuffed to the wall, naked. The officer also found an array of torture tools, including chains, horse bits, whips, and long sticks with clips on the end. There was also a camera, some bloody towels, and several hair strands that did not match that of the woman found in the truck. The truck driver, now identified as Robert Ben Rhodes, was arrested and taken into custody, but at the time, the officers had no idea the extent to which his crimes had actually gone. Raised in Council Bluffs, Iowa, Robert had a relatively normal childhood, but as he got older, he started getting in trouble with the authorities and was even arrested for vehicle tampering and public fighting as a teenager. After graduating from high school in 1964, Robert decided to follow in his father's footsteps and join the Marine Corps. But that same year, his dad took his own life after being accused of violating a 12-year-old girl. A few years later, Robert was dishonorably discharged from the military after being involved in a robbery. He tried to get a job in law enforcement after this, but was rejected due to the robbery incident. Eventually, he ended up becoming a long-haul trucker. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, Robert was married 3 times and had a son with his first wife. That also was the time he started getting involved in the bondage and submission stuff, and one of his ex-wives even said that he was allegedly abusive to her and was turned on by her suffering. When the police searched Robert's apartment after his arrest, they were horrified to find pictures of naked teenage girls with handcuffs and bruises all over their bodies. All of them had shaved hair and terrified looks on their faces. And as investigators were going through the chilling images, they noticed that one of the victims looked familiar. It was Regina Walters. The images showed her with different hair lengths and bruises, which meant that she had been held captive for an extended period of time before she was eventually murdered. These particularly disturbing pictures show a defenseless Regina wearing a black dress were said to have been taken moments before her death. As it would turn out, Regina and Ricky were not Robert's first victims. He was a serial killer who had been preying on women and hitchhikers from as early as the 1970s. His first confirmed victims were actually a couple, Patricia Candace Walsh and her husband, Douglas Zykowski. The two were hitchhiking in January 1990 when Robert picked them up in his truck while on a long-haul journey. Just like in Ricky and Regina's case, he immediately killed the husband and then kept Patricia for a week, torturing and violating her multiple times, before eventually killing and dumping her body. In a span of 15 years, investigators believe that Robert had killed about 50 people before he was eventually caught.
His trips from Houston to Baltimore to LA and back in a matter of 4 to 5 days at a time could just give you an idea of how many people he has access to and remote locations that he could abuse these people and dispose of them.
Robert is now 76 years old and serving life without parole in the Menard Correctional Center in Southern Illinois.
I'm a plumber and I'm on site for a job, and we've been pulling back. We probably pulled back about 10 pounds, 15 pounds of it looks like flesh type of stuff, meat, and we don't know what it is.
This man is the monster who brutally murdered a teenage girl in his home and then chopped her up and flushed her remains down the toilet. And he could have gotten away with it too if his neighbors hadn't hired a plumber to check what was clogging the drains.
You were wondering if you her up.
It's obvious that I did.
Yeah, and again, if not for, apparently the plumbing was all up in that house. That aided in
my capture
and your capture.
Yeah.
Terrifyingly, this was not his first murder. This is the horrifying case of the teen girls' bodies whose chunks were found in the toilet pipes. On September 11th, 2017, at around 8 p.m., an 11-year-old boy and his grandfather were fishing near Lake Ontario Harbor in Oshawa, Canada, when they noticed something strange wobbling around in the water. When they went to check, they were horrified to discover that it was a woman's torso.
The busy spot along the waterfront is now a disturbing crime scene.
The discovery made by a fisherman and his grandson. They saw a torso in the water.
Lots of questions tonight, very few answers. Who was this woman? Where did she come from? Who wanted her dead? We know that her body was found in the water by the pier behind me, but where was she murdered?
A post-mortem examination conducted on the body part could not determine the cause of death, but the coroner said that the torso showed obvious signs of trauma. The police ruled the case as a homicide and immediately started the process of identifying who this poor woman was.
Then the daunting task is to take all these missing persons reports, get DNA from the family members of all those people, and then one at a time have them swab their cheek, send that off to the Center of Forensic Sciences, and that'll be compared to the DNA on the body.
After 2 months of comparing DNA, police were finally able to identify the victim as 18-year-old Rory Hash, who was last seen by her family in August 2017. Rory was described as a bright, beautiful, and kind girl who loved animals and aspired to be a veterinarian. Unfortunately, Rory struggled with substance addiction that sometimes led her to go out on the streets and do things that would put her in harm's way.
Rory left first week of high school. I feel that was the beginning of the end for us. I fell into the wrong crowd and started coming home with a different attitude, a different self-pride about herself. Everything was just different within the first month. It was very noticeable. I have no idea who would have wanted to hurt her, because she was so good to everybody.
But before she went missing, her family said that Rory was trying to put her life back on track after finding out that she was pregnant. Sadly, she never got the chance to do that. Rory was last seen alive on August 29th when her friend and her friend's mom took her to the hospital after she experienced a mental breakdown. You can see them in this footage entering the emergency room and sitting in the waiting area. However, after a while, both the friend and the mother left, leaving Rory alone in the hospital. Rory waits for about 15 minutes, and then for some reason, she also leaves without even seeing a doctor. It would be the last time that she was ever seen alive again. So what happened to her? And how did her torso end up in a lake 2 weeks later?
Communications. I'm a plumber and I'm on site for a job. We got we're snaking a drain, and we've been pulling back. We probably pulled back about 10 pounds, 15 pounds of it looks like flesh type of stuff. Meat, and we don't know what it is.
On December 29th, 2017, 2 plumbers were working at an apartment building in downtown Oshawa, where they had been hired by tenants on the main floor to unclog their drains. While trying to figure out what was clogging the drains, the plumbers stumbled upon a gruesome, flesh-like substance inside the pipes. Although they really didn't know what it was suspicious enough to make them call the police. The police arrived at around 8 p.m., and they were shown 2 shopping bags containing the flesh-like substance, which was about 13 to 14 inches long. One of the officers would later testify that they had never seen anything like that before, so they were not sure what it was. 4 officers then went into the basement apartment where a man opened the door. When the officers asked him what he was flushing down the toilet, his response was completely shocking. The man was 45-year-old Adam Strong. Not much is known about Adam other than that he sometimes worked as a gas station attendant and a security guard on movie sets. His social media is also filled with disturbing posts about how he's not being able to find a woman who could accept his twisted fantasies. He also posted pictures of blades and handcuffs on Facebook with the captions reading, "Home is where my handcuffs hang." Adam was not on the police radar until that day, and when officers entered his house, he had no idea of the horror they were about to uncover. Inside Adam's bedroom, police found a large freezer that contained a human head and other remains wrapped up in garbage bags. The remains would be identified as Rory's. Her blood was all over the bedroom walls and ceiling, and Adam's bodily fluids would also be discovered on her body, indicating that he had violated her before she died. A medical examiner found that Rory had suffered multiple injuries on her body, including 2 skull fractures that seemed to have been caused by a hammer. However, due to the state that her body was in, it was not clear whether the injuries were caused before or after she died.
A citizen alerted police after finding more remains in this basement apartment. A pipe bomb-like device was also found, prompting police to evacuate nearby homes. That night, they arrested 45-year-old Adam Strong. He was charged with indecent interference with a body. Despite linking the two crime scenes today, police say no additional charges have been laid.
At this time, there's no homicide charges against anyone, and we're still going through all the evidence.
Police describing the crime scene at this home on McMillan Drive as extensive. So much so, they've applied for a 30-day extension on the original warrant. An autopsy has been performed, yet it did not determine the cause of death.
Inside Adam's cluttered apartment, police were able to uncover a number of pieces of evidence, including a hammer, restraining devices, and Rory's shoe, which had red splatters all over it. They also found a hunting knife specially designed for gutting and skinning animals, and when they checked it for DNA, they realized in horror that it was another victim. Adam had killed before and gotten away with it. Her name was Candace Fitzpatrick, and she had been missing for almost 10 years. Candace was 19 years old when she disappeared, and like Rory, she was struggling with addictions and living in the streets after running away from home. She would also sell her body to help support her habit. Candace vanished in central Oshawa in 2008, but tragically, her family didn't actually notice until several months had passed. Her dad said that he had tried reporting it to the police, but they dismissed him because she was living in the streets. So they launched a Facebook page to help search for her. However, over the years, they did not hear anything about her until now.
I think anytime you tell a family or the parents of locating their DNA in a residence, widely publicized as much as 19 McMillan has been, it's shocking to them.
Despite the evidence against him and the fact that he had already told the police where to find the rest of Rory's remains, Adam denied killing Rory and Candace, claiming that he only disposed of their bodies. While being questioned, Adam appeared calm and relaxed, and casually talked about how he dismembered Rory's body as if it was nothing.
So, the 24th is when you start this. You said Christmas Eve? Yes. Are you doing this while it's frozen or is it partially defrosted? Completely defrosted. Okay. Now that would take several hours, wouldn't it? No, not backed up in hot water.
He showed no remorse for his action and actually seemed proud about what he had done, even telling the detective that flushing Rory's body was an awesome way of getting rid of a body.
Okay, how much of her body did you guys get back? Obviously the entire skeletal structure, right?
Well, we obviously whatever was in the house.
Yes, in the freezer.
Yes.
And how much of it were you able to pull out of the pipes?
Quite a bit. It was bad luck.
Yeah, that's what I tell people. They're like, you're stupid. I'm like, you kidding me?
Well,
that's an awesome way.
Yeah.
I just got greedy, that's all.
However, while he easily admitted that he had decapitated Rory, he refused to say anything about how he had murdered the two teens, insisting that he wanted to be comfortable in jail and have internet access in exchange for that information, keeping his cards close to his chest in exchange for living comfortably in prison.
Spilling the beans and being as comfortable as I can in jail. Not like $100,000 like Pigden, but like an allowance. I don't know. I don't know. Like internet access, like a TV. Like I don't have anybody who's gonna buy me a TV.
Adam was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder of both Rory and Candace. During his trial, the prosecution argued that although Candace's body was yet to be found, Adam had probably killed her much in the same way that he killed Rory. Adam preyed on the 2 teens because they were both vulnerable, homeless, and struggling with substance abuse, so he thought no one would miss them. Adam tried to defend himself, claiming that the 2 teens had died of an overdose and that he only disposed of their bodies because he didn't want to be implicated. However, the judge didn't believe this, and in March 2021, Adam was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Rory and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. He also got 18 years in prison for the charge of manslaughter in Candace's death because there was no evidence to prove that he had intentionally killed her. Both sentences would run concurrently.
The cries of victory from those closest to Rory Hache and Candace Fitzpatrick after learning Adam Strong, guilty of first-degree murder and manslaughter, is now going away to prison for good.
It does not change the fact that our girls are not coming home, but today we let them rest. Today this monster's off our street, and he's no longer a part of our day. He's no longer a part of our lives.
In his remarks, Justice Joseph DeLuca addressed Strong directly, saying, "Your moment before us is done. You are a dangerous predator who will never be seen in public again."
However, the story doesn't end there. In November of 2021, after missing for almost 14 years, Candace's remains were finally found after Adam led the police to where he had hidden them.
We conducted an operation which led us to a small clearing by the tree line behind Secreto Drive in Oshawa. I can confirm today that the remains found last November are those of Candace Fitzpatrick.
I'm on 25th State, and this is young man. He is butt naked. He has been up. He's very bruised up. He can't stand. He's study fall out. He is butt naked. He has no clothes on. He is really hurt.
This is 14-year-old Keneric Synthesiphone, and he is the 13th victim of this man, Jeffrey Dahmer. What makes this case different from this notorious killer's 16 other victims are the heartbreaking circumstances around it. You see, Somsak was lucky enough to escape Dahmer's grip only 3 years later. Dahmer went on to capture Keneric, who also managed to escape, but the failures by law enforcement to protect one of their citizens meant Dahmer was allowed to take him back to his house of horrors and early death. Let's dig into one of our most twisted cases, the tragic story of the 14-year-old boy that was drugged and killed by Jeffrey Dahmer.
I wish I could have just found some type of brick or some type of stick that night and never called the police and just knocked him out and took the boy. I could have took him, and then he could have recovered. And then his family, they would have to go through what they went through.
By 1991, the Synthesiphone family had been living in Milwaukee for over a decade after fleeing repression in their home of Laos. The father, Southone, had been threatened with losing his rice farm, so he took his family and fled to Thailand in 1979, where they spent a year living in a refugee camp. They would move to America in 1980, where they would join family in an area already flourishing with Laotian immigrants. The family adjusted to the American way of life pretty quickly, with the children becoming fluent in English and those old enough taking jobs to earn their way. But in 1988, this family's American dream was about to become a nightmare, as Jeffrey Dahmer began a campaign of terror against them that would span 3 years, but last a lifetime. When Keneric's brother was only 13, still an innocent child, Dahmer approached him with an offer that would earn him some extra cash. Dahmer wanted to take Somsak home and take photographs of him for money. The job, however, came with a sickening twist attached. He had to pose naked. While he was there, he was abused in the most sickening ways and given narcotics to make him easier to control so Dahmer could have his way with him. Luckily, Somsak escaped and reported it to the police. Dahmer was arrested for his twisted crime and sentenced for second-degree sexual assault and luring a minor for immoral purposes. This is where the Synthesiphone family's story with Jeffrey Dahmer should have ended. Their son had survived a brutal ordeal, and the man responsible was locked away. But the first of many other crazy decisions or failures by the authorities meant this was only just the beginning. Dahmer was released a year into his sentence and given 5 years probation. Many more families were about to go through heartbreak after his release, as the next 5 years he would claim 12 victims on his murderous spree. Before long, one family would have to face the terror of one of the world's sickest men all over again. A terror they had no idea was coming. Police claimed they informed the Synthesiphone family of his early release, but the family says differently. 3 years later, Kenerick, who did not know Jeffrey Dahmer or what a psycho he was, found himself in the same position as his brother.
We're gonna party. Party hardy.
Dahmer asked him to come to his home where he would pay him to take photos, again, posing naked. What this man didn't know was that this killer's last victim, Tony Hughes, was inside the bedroom, and his body was beginning to give off a smell. He never had the chance to discover this sickening secret, as Dahmer gave him narcotics and tortured him before holding him down and performing one of the most despicable acts one person can do to another. He drilled directly into Kenerick's skull and injected hydrochloric acid into the hole. Why would he attempt this homemade lobotomy? Because he wanted his victim in a zombie-like state, making them easier to manipulate. At some point, Dahmer left the house, leaving Kenerick alone, but instead of being incapacitated, he had enough will and strength left in him to escape and try to find help. On the night of May 27, 1991, he was found on the street by several women. One of them, Nicole Childress, was the person who made the call to 911.
He needs some help on 25th and State, the corner of 25th and State.
He's just on the corner at the street?
Yeah, he in the middle of the street. He fell out. We tried to help him, so people tried to help him.
During this time, Dahmer returned home, and he wanted his victim back. But just in time, the police arrived, and it looked like Kenerick was saved. Officers on the scene had the chance to put an end to the sadistic spree of murder once and for all, and go down in law enforcement history. But what they did instead is just unbelievable.
Two girls had called 911 police or something. I put my arm around it, trying to walk it back to the apartment, and got halfway there, and that's when the police and rescue squad.
3 officers and paramedics arrived on the scene quickly. Supposedly, the witness told the police the young man seemed to be the victim of assault and was bleeding from his private area. No matter how hard he tried, Kenerick could not speak properly as the acid in his brain had already caused damage, leaving the officers to either take the word of these 3 witnesses or a man who would turn out to be a cold-blooded killer. But get this, even though he had called Kenerick several different names before managing to gain control of him, police still took the word of Jeffrey Dahmer over these 3 very concerned witnesses. He claimed the young man was 19 years old, staying with him, and was just simply drunk. It's incredible to think that the officials on the scene could simply dismiss what appeared so obvious, but we'll come back to the reason why that might be shortly. The pair were escorted by the police to Dahmer's home, where again these officers had the chance to stop a serial killer, but somehow failed to act in the face of some strange circumstances. Inside his home, he showed the officers photos of Kenerick he had taken the day before, as proof that they knew each other. While they were there, they could not escape the unusual smell in the apartment, a smell they should recognize: death, and lots of it. Several victims were still somewhere in Dahmer's apartment, and the officer who went to check out the smell should have been the one to discover his blood secret. Dahmer himself has said that the officer looked into his bedroom, where the smell seemed to be coming from, but did not investigate further. Is it possible that the officer saw the body of Tony Hughes, but decided not to act? Surely he must have seen the body on the floor, or at least seen something that needed a closer look. Instead, they condemned a 14-year-old to an early grave.
And they left. That's when I gave the second GP.
Right away? How long did it take them to die?
And that was immediate.
This time, the acid injected into his brain was enough to kill him. A sad, heartbreaking end to an innocent life that should have been saved more than once. As if to add insult to injury, his body was dismembered, stripping this boy of all dignity. A few months later, Dahmer was eventually caught after his final victim successfully escaped and alerted police.
A gruesome story leads off our newscast.
Milwaukee police found body parts in a North Side apartment, and now they wonder if they've uncovered some kind of death factory.
They found remains of several men inside the apartment, including Kenerick's skull. For his crimes, he would spend the rest of his life in prison. That should at least give the families of his victims some closure. But the Synthes-Safome family will never forget their encounters with one of America's most deranged men, who took one of their sons away and left another scarred for life. Why didn't the police act on what those witnesses and their own eyes saw that night? Were questions Konarek's family were prepared to ask. In fact, they were ready to make the police department answer for their failures in court.
I'm angry, I'm scared, I'm hurt, because some of these kids, 2 of them I knew.
The family filed a lawsuit claiming the department had shown discrimination against certain areas of the community, in this case anyone who is of ethnic minority or LGBT citizens. They claimed the police didn't listen to the witnesses at the time because of their ethnic background, and this was not an isolated incident. Shockingly, the officers who attended were accused of making homophobic comments and jokes about the pair, which should tell us why they showed little concern and left Konarek at the apartment with Dahmer. Recorded police radio may just show how these officials felt about the situation.
Intoxicated Asian naked male was returned to his sober boyfriend, and we're at 8.
These failings would not go unnoticed by others.
The story that's breaking here this afternoon in Milwaukee suggests police incompetence of the most incredible kind. It is contained in the front page of the Milwaukee Journal this afternoon, the headline reading, "Police were in the Dahmer apartment." This was May 27th, nearly 2 months before the first bodies were found there.
They should lose their jobs. They should not be suspended. They should not be, suspended with pay. I don't know what's happening, but they should lose their jobs. This costs people lives.
The Synthesophone family settled with the city for almost $1 million, and the officers were fired, although they were reinstated in a controversial decision. This family has suffered more heartbreak than most could ever endure, and will never be the same again after their encounters with one of the world's most evil men, Jeffrey Dahmer. What do you guys think? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section, and if you liked this video, be sure to like and subscribe for more.